Here's the setting. The year is 2022, COVID's a little more under control now, and you're excited about going to the theater to see Doctor Strange 2, and you take your 10-year-old son with you. You're just dying for some more Marvel action. You hear that Wanda the Scarlet Witch is in it. It's a PG-13 movie. That's appropriate for your 10-year-old, right? All the other Marvel PG-13 movies were appropriate, wasn't they? So there's a certain amount of science fiction violence you expect, but then you see Wanda literally kill everybody graphically, and you and your 10-year-old son have this look in the theater like, are you sure this is PG-13? This violence kind of feels like rated R. Like, I was expecting some superhero type level violence, but this is more of like Evil Dead territory, which was written and directed by Sam Raimi, who directed this movie, so he just basically did what he normally does. But somehow the MPAA let him get a PG-13 on this. So that's the whole point of this video. The rating system is just all over the place, and we need to fix it. Because there's a phenomenon called ratings creep, which means there's some films out there right now that are PG-13 that released 20 years ago might have been rated R. Even in the late 90s and the early 2000s, Austin Powers was really pushing what could be PG-13 because of his sexual lingo. However, an Oscar-winning movie like The King's Speech was actually rated R because he dropped some F-bombs in just one scene where he was frustrated because he couldn't get speech right because he had speech impediment. You may have heard this name before, the MPAA, which stands for Motion Picture Association. They're the ones that give the ratings on these movies, and they've been criticized heavily, and for good reason, because they are so inconsistent. The King's Speech contained no sex, violence, or nudity, but it was rated R because of the F-bombs, and it had the same rating as The Wolf of Wall Street, which has a lot going on. That is crazy inconsistent. So you say to yourself, how do you fix this, Comic Power? Well, I'm about to tell you. There's ratings creep in traditional Hollywood movies, but there's also ratings creep in the industry. And I don't know if you've been watching adult films lately. Of course you're not. You're a good person. You don't watch that type of filth, but they have gotten completely off the rails as well. So those have to get fixed too. So we're going to fix the industry's ratings as well. I'm going to call it corn going forward just to avoid getting demonetized. Here's the current ratings as we know them. There's rated G, PG, PG-13, R, NC-17, and then anything beyond that is rated X. And this is where the corn industry lives. America loves its corn, even if people are too afraid to admit it. Now, let's pivot to PG-13, a rating created in 1984, after some parents complained that movies like Gremlins and Poltergeist were just too hard to be PG. So, to ease those concerns, PG-13 was a good middle ground. However, PG-13 was introduced over 40 years ago. There haven't been any changes to the system. However, society has changed a lot about what it allows and it doesn't allow. And the biggest problem is there's a big gap between PG-13 and R now. And some studios thinking they can make more money if they stuff something into a PG-13 box, even if it's an R-rated character. Number one example, Venom. He's an alien symbiote vigilante. In his comic book origin, he literally eats brains. How do you have a brain-eating alien be PG-13? So Sony tried to keep the horror that the purists from the comic books like, but at the same time tried to make it a little more sanitized to get PG-13. But at the end of the day, even if you try to water it down a little bit, it's still too much for PG-13. Come on, bruh. So here's my way to fix it. I'm going to break down my new rating system as I think it should be. I'm going to give examples of movies in each lane, and I'll use an alcohol metaphor to explain the strength and the kick of just how strong it is. Let's start with rated G. This would be the equivalent of drinking fruit juice with no alcohol in it. Completely safe. Examples would be The Wizard of Oz, The Princess Diaries, Finding Nemo. And then there's PG. That would be the equivalent of drinking a small beer. It's about 2% alcohol. That would be movies like A Wrinkle in Time or Home Alone. And then there's PG-13, I'll keep it like it is, where you might get some crude humor, some light sexual content, occasional strong language. It would be the equivalent of drinking a beer, 5% alcohol. All the movies I'm showing you right now would fall under that category. And that brings us to my new rating, which does not exist yet, PG-16, which is intended for that middle ground between PG-13 and rated R. So movies like Venom, The Dark Knight, The Batman, all the latest James Bond movies like Casino Royale, and of course, Doctor Strange 2, which I talked about at the beginning of the video. The Austin Powers movies all should have been here, of course. But it also would be a home for what I call soft R movies to move down, such as The Five Heartbeats. This film had no nudity, a very tame death scene. So the only thing that made it rated R was a couple of F-bombs. The fact that it's rated R with, say, 10 F-bombs in it, whereas it's got the same rating as The Wolf of Wall Street, which has over 500 F-bombs, a record. The Five Heartbeats has no business being rated R. Some other movies that could be lowered from rated R to PG-16 are LA Confidential, and The Fugitive with Harrison Ford. And to tell you the truth, The Matrix Part 1 probably could move down to PG-16. On my alcohol spectrum, it's like jumping from a beer up to wine, but it's like Moscato. It's about 5% alcohol, but it hits harder than a beer. Yep, we're drinking wine now. It gets you drunk faster. That brings us to rated R. Now, this R classification would be what people consider hard R now. So if you don't want to straddle that difference between R and PG-13 with a PG-16, you can go all out right here. We're not doing the PG-16 Moscato wine, which is about 5% alcohol. We're upgrading to Barefoot wine, which is about 12% alcohol. So every hard R movie you can think of, like every Deadpool movie or The Wolf of Wall Street, which I talked about before, man, that movie's insane if you never saw it. Then there's art house sleaze like Poor Thing starring Emma Stone, where she literally has a gag ball in her mouth doing some BDSM torture porn with full frontal nudity in a very hypersexual movie. But somehow it got a rated R and it won an Oscar. This movie's insane. I had to talk about it in another video. All the overtop horror movies also would live here, such as The Terrifier and Hereditary. So it would tell filmmakers and the public that R actually means R. The fact that the original cut of The King's Speech is rated R and John Wick 4 are both rated R, that is not consistent. That brings us to NC-17. Now we're in the liquor territory, but it's watered down. It's more like gin and juice, but it's still liquor now. Films such as Blue is the Warmest Color and The Dreamers. In these films, you're going to have a very explicit sex, ultra graphic violence, or taboo subjects. Movies like The Dreamers starring Eva Green, which had group orgies in it, and full frontal nudity for both men and women throughout. So it's the closest thing you can get to corn within a narrative setting where it's not actual real corn. But an NC-17 movie such as Blue is the Warmest Color has a nearly 10-minute long lesbian scene which is extremely graphic and looks very real, falls in this category because it's technically not corn, but man, it's pushing it. And now that I said that, you're gonna go Google this after you finish this video, aren't you? Of course you are. The movie Anora is rated R, but it feels like it could have been NC-17 just 10 years ago. The lead character is a sex worker, so it's a hypersexual movie. So it's not outright, but it is hypersexual, and I believe that Poor Thing should have been NC-17, but I think Emma Stone's star power probably kept the studio from getting that rating. A lot of theater chains won't show NC-17, so a lot of filmmakers try to avoid this rating. Okay, after NC-17, we now have to talk about corn. If you haven't been tuned in a while, then corn has gotten really insane these days. I don't know if you know that. This is not your father's corn. The internet has caused a proliferation of an arms race of escalation within the X-rated community, where you have some really crazy stuff. Now, try not to be a gateway for you guys by giving you stuff to go look for, because if you find it, you're going to be really disgusted. So I'm giving you a trigger warning, and I'll try to tone it down a little bit so I don't get demonetized as well. Right now, there's just an X rating and it's open to everything. But just like the regular movies from Hollywood, there should be tiers of intensity within that X rating, escalating from a softer to a harder to an extreme hardcore type of tier. There should be a rating for X, which is pornographic material, and it's not really that far out, but it does include some real penetration. It's not trying to tell a story, it's strictly for arousal. The current AVN Performer of the Year for 2025 is Anna Claire Clouds. She's a former model turned corn star, and her material would fall into this lane. There's no humiliation or degradation. She's more closer to the stuff that, say, Jenna Jameson did in the 90s, which looks pretty tame by today's standards. So she is smashing on camera. She does do some backdoor work, if you know what I mean. So this is what I call just X-rated, and it's 40% alcohol, straight liquor. Then there's double X, which I refer to as hard X. The poster child for this would be, say, Adriana Sheshik, who was the AVN Performer of the Year for 2017. And this stuff is really, really hard. I'm not going to say some of it. I'm just going to give you my disclaimer right here, right now, okay? This is about not getting demonetized. It's really, really far out there. Absolutely shocking type of stuff. It's amazing that this became into the mainstream of corn, and not just fringe, but the mainstream of studios in LA and Miami and Las Vegas, where they shoot most of this stuff. This is the equivalent of Bacardi 151, 75% alcohol. It's going to take your head off. Now, please finish my video before you go Googling this stuff. And like I said, I hate to be a gateway, but you gotta have an idea what I'm talking about. That brings us to triple X, which I refer to as extreme hard. And I really gotta dance around this one because it contains material that some would consider literally, let's just put it this way, the Euro corn stuff that you see, their most extreme stuff, I don't even want to give you any names because it's really out there. Here's Family Guy's take on this.
For crying out loud, Brian, read my book. Judge for yourself.
I'd sooner spend a night watching European porn.
Bravo!
Snark!
Bravo!
Snark!
Bravo!
Snark!
Bravo!
Snark! Snark!
It would be the equivalent of Everclear Golden Grain, which is about 95% alcohol liquor. Alright, in saying that, let's do a recap of my new rating system. That's going to be rated G. This is fruit juice with no alcohol. Think Finding Nemo. Then there's PG, which is the equivalent of a small beer, about 2 to 3% alcohol. Think A Wrinkle in Time. Then there's PG-13, which is a whole beer, which is about 5% alcohol. Think Captain America the Winter Soldier. And then there's my new rating, which is PG-16, which takes us from beer to wine, which is a light wine, about 5% alcohol. Think The Batman from 2022. That brings us to rated R, which people would consider hard R now, which is about 12% barefoot wine. Think Wolf of Wall Street. Then there's NC-17, where we put down the wine and we pick up liquor, but it's gin and juice, so it's a little watered down, but still got liquor in it. Think of The Dreamers. That then crosses us over into the corn territory. It's Absolute Vodka, 40% alcohol liquor. It's the level of real actual acts, but not insane, around the level of, say, Anna Claire Clouds. Then there's rated XX, which I call Hard X, which is like Bacardi 151, 75% alcohol. Think anything Adriana Shashik has ever done. Then there's the Triple X, which I refer to as Extreme X, especially the stuff that's coming out of Europe and the Czech Republic. It's 95% alcohol, golden grain. It might kill you. So that's about it for today. Tell me, what do you think of my new rating system? Do you think it's effective? Do you think there should be some tweaks to it? Do you believe that the MPAA should adopt this new system? Because it's pretty clear that the current system that we have is not working, which is the reason that you and your son were probably looking like this in the movie Doctor Strange 2. That's clearly more than what should be allowed in PG-13. So speak up in the comments and let your voice be heard. Until next time, this is Comic Killer 72 for Comic Power saying bye-bye. And for the love of God, don't go down the rabbit hole on European corn. You'll never ever be able to unsee it. It's disturbing. But now that I piqued your interest, you probably will, won't you? Yeah, you will.